Welcome students. In this series of lectures, we are dealing with the theories and the contribution of various theorists. In sociology, as we know, there are many theoretical perspectives. One such perspective is structuralism. Structuralism was so influential during the middle third of 20th century, and it continues to be that as a part of critical theory which has followed has been referred to as post-structuralism. Of the structuralists, we have a list of theorists like Frazer, Jacobson, Barthes, Althusser, Piaget, Lacan, etc. But out of which Lévi-Strauss was possibly the most widely read and certainly the best known. Structuralism is associated more with the set of above mentioned names and a number of provocative slogans like the death of the subject, the assault of realism, than with the clearly defined program or doctrine. Structuralism has been defined as the search for the underlying patterns of thought in all forms of human activity. Structuralism has influenced not only 20th century social science, but also the study of philosophy, comparative religion, literature and film. It is indeed the case that there are many differences between these thinkers and that each has developed the basic idea of structuralism in their own way. However, there is a basic theme at the heart of structuralism, and it is largely from the works of Levi-Strauss. That is, this theme comes. In this session, we are going to discuss on his contribution to the theoretical knowledge of sociology. To begin with, in this lesson, we are going to discuss on the major works of Levi-Strauss, the intellectual influences of Levi-Strauss, and Levi-Strauss' structural approach to sociology and social anthropology. To begin with, we can see his biography. Claude Lévi-Strauss was born in the year 1908 and he lived for 100 years and he died in the year 2009. He is widely regarded as the father of structural anthropology. He was a French anthropologist, ethnologist, and has been called, along with James George Frazer, as the father of modern anthropology. His analysis of kinship and myth gave rise to structuralism as an intellectual force. He is usually considered to be the founder of the intellectual movement known as structuralism, which was to have such influence especially in 1970s. He was one of the French intellectuals whose influence spread to many other disciplines because they were philosophers in a much broader sense of the word than the academic philosophers. Biography. Lévi-Strauss was born in Brussels, Belgium in the year 1908 and had a typical intellectual training in the leading institutions of Paris. After studying philosophy and law at the University of Paris in the year 1927 to 32, Lévi-Strauss taught in a secondary school and was associated with Jean-Paul Sartre intellectual circle. In 1930s, his visit to Brazil remained as a turning point in his intellectual life because from then he began to become more and more interested in anthropology. His opportunity to become a professional anthropologist came when Durkheimian sociologist Celestin Bugel recommended him for a teaching post as a sociologist in Brazil. He served as a professor of sociology at the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil for the period of 1934 to 37 and did field research on Indians of Brazil. In Brazil, he conducted field work and he published his first ethnographic report in 1936. In 1938 to 39, he made a more extensive field work trip in Brazil. Following military service in France, he fled as a Jew to United States in 1940. There he taught at the New School for Social Research, where he was influenced by the work of linguistics Roman Jacobson. He finally returned to France only in 1947, he having served for 2 years as a French cultural attaché in United States. From 1950 to 74, he was the director of studies at École pratique des hautes études at the University of Paris, and in 1959 he was appointed as the chair of social anthropology at Collège de France. Now we can see the works of Lévi-Strauss. In 1949, Lévi-Strauss published his first major work, Les structures élémentaires de la parenté, which was revised and translated in the year 1967 as The Elementary Structures of Kinship. He attained popular recognition because of publishing his work on Treatise Tropique. In the year 1955, it was translated as A World of the Vain, which was a literary intellectual autobiography of Lévi-Strauss. Other publication includes Anthropologie structurelle, translated as Structural Anthropology in 1961. Then he have his major work on La Pensée Sauvage, which was translated in the year 1962 as The Savage Mind, and Le Totemisme Adjure Hui, which was translated as Totemism in the year 1962. His massive work on mythologic, which was a 4-volume work, is appeared as Les Crus et les Cuits, which was translated as The Raw and the Cooked in the year 1964. Tu Mille Aux Centres, which was translated as From Honey to Ashes in the year 1966. La Origine des Manners des Tables, which was translated as The Origin of Table Manners, and the last work of his mythological volume is Le Homme Nu, which was translated as The Naked Man. In the year 1973, a second volume of Anthropologie structurelle appeared as Le Voie des Masques, which was translated as The Way of the Masks, which analyzed the art, religion and mythology of Native American North Coast Indians. In the year 1983, he published a collection of essays, Les Records Éloignés, which was The View from Afar. Now, students, we can discuss some of the major contributions of Lévi-Strauss. Here we can consider his explanations on structural anthropology, binary oppositions, structuralism and his view towards exchange for today's discussion. Lévi-Strauss, thought and the intellectual influences. Before going into the works of Lévi-Strauss individually, we can first know about the intellectual roots from where he developed his perspective. Lévi-Strauss' intellectual development initial years were influenced by 3 components. They are Marx, Freud and geology. He considered all the 3 lay the seed of his own intellectual approach. Strauss was impressed by the power and consistency of Marxist thought in terms of scientific form and structural explanation of the society revolving around the ownership of the capital, the means of production and class structure. But Strauss was against Marxist mode of cultural analysis, so his work provides one of the most significant anti-materialist approaches to culture. The second influencing factor in Lévi-Strauss' intellectual influences was Freud. Freud's work on the interpretation of dreams, mythologies and neuroses impressed Lévi-Strauss. Freud's ability to explain the psyche with id, ego and superego in systematic relationship with each other and his definition about processes like transference, denial, wish fulfillment and repression, etc. influences Lévi-Strauss. Lévi-Strauss shares with Freud an interest in structure of human mind. Both Lévi-Strauss and Freud had similarity in their writings and they used to have research puzzles in their essays. The third factor he talks about is geology. Geology is the study of landscape. He appreciated the hidden structures in the landscape like hills, river, valleys, vegetation and so on. The uncovering deep causative patterns that lie under the visible landscape were his concern. He was not interested in explaining the detail, but rather with using detail to reconstruct larger and more important underlying forms. Lévi-Strauss sum up about his intellectual influences like from his own words, all the three, that is Marx, Freud and geology, that understanding consists in reducing one type of reality to another, that the true reality is never the most obvious and that the nature of truth is already indicated by the care it takes to remain elusive. Apart from these three influential factors, works of Frazer and Durkheim also had made an impact in the works of Lévi-Strauss. Now we can move on to his contributions. Structural anthropology. The basis of structural anthropology of Lévi-Strauss is the idea that human brain is systematically organized, that he called as structured. It is an organized unit of information that combine and recombine to create models. This organized process explains the world we live in, sometimes suggest imaginary alternatives and sometimes give tools with which to operate in it. For structural anthropology, theory, not observation is the starting point. It seeks to explain the underlying universal structures common to all men rather than seek to explain the observed differences between the culture. Different cultures are seen as mere subsystems of totality of human culture. He called it as l'esprit humain. Structural theory emphasizes our common humanity and focuses on the collective and unconscious properties of human culture. The task of anthropologists for Lévi-Strauss is not to account for why a culture takes a particular form, but to understand and illustrate the principles of organization that underlie the onward process of transformation that occurs as carriers of the culture solve problems that are either practical or purely intellectual. In the year 1940s, he proposed that the proper focus of anthropological investigations was on the underlying patterns of human thought that produce the cultural categories that organize world views hitherto studied. He believed these processes were not deterministic of culture, but instead operated within culture. His work is where observations of anthropology are used to support a rule that is universal, a rule that comes from the very structure of the mind that works itself as a rule into society, that is seen in structures and which allows society to function. From anthropological surface observation, one goes back to structures, rules and then fundamentals of mentality, that is what he called as oppositions. Emile Durkheim and Marshall Mars as well as the Paraguay School of Structural Linguistics heavily influenced Lévi-Strauss, and it can be seen in his work. In language, much is made of oppositions. The structural oppositions are also found in society. Structuralism is about such a fundamental classification of oppositions found in language and also in the society. Society does not throw these up as such. He denies Radcliffe Brown's naturalism, but they are put into to make the society to function. So, the cosmology of opposition comes first and only then a particular social system, where he denies the naturalism of Radcliffe Brown. From the later, he derived the concept of binary contrasts, later referred to in his work as binary oppositions, which became fundamental in his theory. In the year 1972, his book Structuralism and Ecology was published detailing the tenets of what would become structural anthropology. Anthropology was, for Lévi-Strauss, one of the cognitive sciences. He was, however, insistent that although the cognitive could explain structure, it could not explain the content. In his work on structuralism and ecology, he proposed that culture, like language, is composed of hidden rules that govern the behaviour of its practitioners. What made cultures unique and different from one another are the hidden rules participants understood but are unable to articulate. Thus, the goal of structural anthropology is to identify these rules which are hidden in the culture. He maintained that culture is a dialectic process where there will be a thesis and an antithesis and a combination to form a synthesis. Lévi-Strauss proposed a methodological means of discovering these rules through the identification of binary oppositions. Now we can see what is this binary opposition means. Claude Lévi-Strauss is a theorist who came up with the idea that films contain binary opposites. His view on binary opposition was that the way we understand certain words depends not so much on the meaning they themselves creates, but much more on our understanding of the difference between the word and its opposite, or as he called it as binary opposites. He realized that words purely act as symbols for the society's ideas and the meaning of the words. Therefore, he believed that they were a relationship between opposing ideas. Binary oppositions can be found in a range of media products such as a film trailers. For example, our understanding of the word villain depends on the difference between the word and the opposing word hero. Within the media field, binary oppositions are used very frequently in films, especially in the horror genre. Many horror films include sets of binary oppositions in their plots, particularly good and evil, sane and insane, rational and irrational, and human and supernatural. Now we can see his contribution to structuralism. Lévi-Strauss' own structuralism is a personal amalgam of a naturalist's approach to the study of human beings and a philosophical attitude derived from this. The strictly scientific aspect was largely the result of combination of two types of theoretical influences. The first has to do with his contact with American cultural anthropology, a relation that is ambiguous since it is so much at a distance, as was to be his attitude to all other contemporary theoretical influences. Secondly, he came to contact with structural linguistics, a behavioristic amalgam of European and American theories, and particularly the more imaginative work of Roman Jacobson, the Russian theoretician of language, who was also at the New School at the time where he also worked there. Lévi-Strauss structuralism can be explained as a conceptual system elicited from sensible social experience in an ethical moral construct, or it can be constructs, which implicitly recognize that what is and what ought to be distinction. But was a conceptual system in which the operational variables are largely unverifiable. They are primarily the expression of aesthetic and traditional. The conceptual system usually need not rational or empirical, where experimentation is impossible, where deductive inductive consideration is not at all possible. His approach on anthropology of structuralism is considered as a dichotomy. Now we can see that other end, which is ethical moral construct. The opposite extreme views structuralism as a scientific epistemological theory of culture, involves the operational distinction between what is and what ought to be as a genuine scientific endeavor. Here in this view, structuralism does not expect to conceptualize the socio-cultural universe at the level of sensible social experience, but at a meta-linguistic theoretical level. This is a result of inductive-deductive operations or second level inductions, that is making use of secondary data. For him, anthropology was scientific as well as naturalistic, that is scientific in the way that structural linguistics had made it scientific. By looking at the transformations of language that occur as a new utterances are generated by using the tools that a particular language makes available, structural linguistics was able, so Lévi-Strauss believed, to understand not only the irreducible specificities of particular language, but also the principles that made their production possible. In this way, linguistics, as he understood it, was a branch of humanities and a natural science that is able to connect directly with psychology and neurology, which are both scientific as well as naturalistic. Now we can see Lévi-Strauss' interpretation towards exchange. Lévi-Strauss rejected Frazer's utilitarian explanation on exchange through cross-cousin marriages and also rejected psychological interpretation of exchange processes. Lévi-Strauss emphasized that human possesses a cultural heritage of norms and values that separates their behavior and societal organization from that of animal species. Human action is thus qualitatively different from animal behavior, especially in terms of social exchange. Lévi-Strauss argues several fundamental exchange principles, out of which 3 are more significant. We can see one by one. All exchange relations involve cost for individuals. Such costs are attributed to those customs, rules, laws and values that require behaviors incurring. Exchange will be there for all those scarce and valued resources in society. The valued things can be material, like in the primitive society, wives, or symbolic resources like esteem or prestige. Once these resources become scarce, it becomes highly valued and their distribution is soon regulated. The third thing is, all exchange regulations are governed by a norm of reciprocity, requiring those receiving valued resources to bestow on their benefactors other valued resources. Lévi-Strauss' impact on sociological exchange theory are various forms of social structure rather than individual motives or the critical variables in the analysis of social exchange relations. Exchange relations in social systems are frequently not restricted to direct interaction among individuals, but are protracted into complex networks of indirect exchange. These exchange processes are caused by patterns of social interaction and organization. On the other hand, they promote diverse forms of social organization. On the one hand, these exchange processes are caused by patterns of social integration and organization. On the other hand, they promote diverse forms of social organization. For Lévi-Strauss, how these different types of direct and indirect exchange are linked to different patterns of social organization was the central theme for study. Now we can summarize. Dear students, in this presentation we had seen the leading structural theorist Lévi-Strauss. He is one of the major intellectual figures of 20th century. In this unit, we have discussed so many things about the theorist. Now, it is the time to summarize what we have learned so far. We know from the present lesson that his theory of structuralism has been influential not only in anthropology, but across the entire field of humanities and social sciences. We started this particular discussion with biography of Lévi-Strauss, followed by his works, his explanation about structural anthropology, structuralism, and his view towards exchange. In the next deliberation, students, we can see on his classical works on myth, kinship and human mind. Okay students, in order to check your progress, I will just like to raise few questions. Write a short note on biography of Lévi-Strauss. Who Whom according to you are the influential persons in the life of Lévi-Strauss? What according to Lévi-Strauss is structural anthropology? Okay students, bye for now. We can meet in the next session with the rest of the contributions of Lévi-Strauss. Thank you. Bye.